How's everybody doing? Great to be learning with you 1 hour early on a Monday, just as Rosh Chodesh is coming in, the beginning of the month of Kislev, the month of miracles. And please God, we need some miracles now. Perhaps this will be the month when peace will be restored, a secure peace restored to the Holy Land. Please God, let it be so. We're an hour early today because Nina and I have to go to an event for the Jewish Journal of LA. Nevertheless, we're going to do a double daf, just like we did yesterday, helping us to get back on the schedule. We'll skip a few sections as we go along. I'll explain why, and we'll get a little closer. Let's light up the darkness. All right, who's in the house on a Monday? Bill in Mid-Missouri, Paul in the Great Northwest, Shandora in the Bronx, Sharon in New Jersey, John in Maine, Joseph, Massachusetts, Melissa in Great Neck. No, we're not going to be early every night, just today. Okay, and also Aoife in Florida, Marjorie in Georgia, Rochelle in Modesto. And looks like Penelope in Anaheim. Welcome, everybody. Let's do this. Pages Zion and Ches, pages 7 and 8, here in Tractate Bava Kamma, the 21st volume of the Talmud. Continuing our discussion of Mishna number 1, here in chapter 1. Basic idea, enumerating the four types of categories of damages that are paid when somebody is injured. The sages have been arguing quite a bit. What is the logic of these primary categories? Fire, ox, pit, and at least according to the opinion of Rava, man, meaning when a human inflicts damage directly on another human. What is it really that these categories have in common and don't have in common? They're all mentioned specifically in the Torah. That's why they're broken out here. But we saw that Rabbi Oshai and Rabbi Chia had different lists with many more categories. And it's not so much the type of damage that's inflicted necessarily, but how the injured party is made whole afterward. And something that we saw in common in all these categories is that if the injured party is found to be, injured, and that the one who caused the damage or the one who owns the ox or who dug the pit or started the fire that caused the damage, if he's actually found liable and he has to pay, and he doesn't have money or movable property on hand with which to pay the damages, then we're going to take from his superior quality land in order to make the injured party whole. From his superior quality land. That's where we are. We're going to skip actually we picked this up at the very bottom of page 6b, going into 7a, but we're going to skip the first part of this discussion, which was, well, what happens if the ox that caused the damage is owned by the temple because it was consecrated? The ox was consecrated by its owner. Or what if somebody's ox gored another ox, and the ox that was gored was owned by the Holy Temple because it was consecrated property? So not surprisingly, as we've seen before, whenever there's an interaction that involves money, right, or property with the Holy Temple, basically the temple always wins. The temple treasurer always wins. And that protects the Jews. It's not that the temple was some kind of corrupt institution that always needed to win. It's enshrined, right, in the law that it always wins. And the reason is because if there's any kind of a doubt, and it ends up that you sort of are at an advantage, right, that you ended up taking money or property that actually rightfully should have stayed with the temple, then it's not just that you win in your negotiation with the temple, it's that you've actually misappropriated consecrated property, and that's a big avera, that's a transgression. And so to protect people from that, basically the temple always wins, right? The temple always wins, so you always want to be quite careful if you're going to consecrate property to define exactly what it is you're consecrating. If you're walking your ox through the public domain, make sure it doesn't gore anybody, and most of all, that it doesn't gore an ox that belongs to the holy temple, etc. The temple always wins, and that protects us from coming to misappropriate consecrated property. So we pick this up about halfway down, or maybe 2/3 of the way down on page 7a. So the Gemara considers some other issues concerning the form in which restitution should be paid, right? Again, the idea that if you have to pay with your land, it's going to be superior quality land, right? If you have superior, intermediate, and inferior quality land, for the purpose of paying damages to a party that you injured, if you don't have cash on hand, if you don't have movable property on hand, we're going to take from you, the court is going to take from you your superior quality land. Now, Abaye raises a contradiction, and he addresses this contradiction to Rava, right? Abaye and Rava were often debate partners. So Abaye says, it is written, the best of his field and of the best of his vineyard shall he pay. Exodus 22:4. So this indicates that from his best quality land, yes, he shall pay. But from something else, no, he shall not pay. Right, now, I just told you where the law ends up is that if you injure somebody and they figure out how much damages you owe, if you have cash or movable property on hand, you give from that. And it's only if you don't have those kinds of property on hand that we go to your superior quality land. But Abaye is saying, well, in the Torah it says, if you damage another from your best quality land or from the best of your vineyard, you shall pay. So why are we saying that you can pay from cash or movable property before we go to the land? But isn't it taught in a baraisa? The verse states, and if a man shall open a pit, or if a man shall dig a pit and not cover it, and an ox or a donkey fall therein, the owner of the pit shall pay, he shall recompense money to its owners. Exodus 22, verses 33 and 34. So now we have a source for why we would go to money before we start making people liquidate their real estate. Now, since the verse states, the owner of the pit shall pay, the additional term, he shall recompense, is superfluous. It therefore serves to include any item worth money, meaning your movable property, right? So you don't have to liquidate your land. And says the Gemara, even bran, right? Like bran, like grain, that's a low quality grain as opposed to wheat. This is considered a relatively inferior commodity, but it is a valid form of restitution to one that you damage that you can use to pay before we go make you liquidate your real estate. So Rava resolves the contradiction. This is not difficult. Here, the term, he shall recompense, is referring to a case where he pays of his own volition without being taken to court, and he may therefore use any form of payment. There, the phrase of the best of his field is referring to a case where he pays against his will. After the injured party has sued him in court, since he has caused the injured party additional trouble, he must pay using his best quality land. Now, Ula, the son of Rav Eli, said, According to this explanation, the language of the verse is also precise, as it is written, he shall pay, a term that, as opposed to he shall recompense, connotes that he is forced to pay against his will. Abaye said to him that the precise meaning of the verse does not indicate that he is paying against his will. Is it written, he shall be paid, in the passive form, which would clearly indicate that he did not voluntarily initiate the payment himself, but rather is paying against his will? No, he shall pay is written, which can also indicate that he pays of his own volition. So rather, Abaye has a different resolution, similar to that which the master, i.e. Abaye's teacher Rabbah, employed in order to resolve a different difficulty. As it is taught in a Baraisa, a wealthy person is not entitled to take a poor man's tithe. Why would a wealthy person take the poor man's tithe? Isn't the poor man's tithe, which would be collected, right, in the 3rd and 6th years of the 7-year Shemitah cycle, where in the 1st and 2nd and in the 3rd and 4th years, the 4th and 5th years of the cycle, the second tithe is Meiser Sheni, and what's it used for? To fund your pilgrimage up to Jerusalem during the festivals. But in two of the 7 years of that Shemitah cycle, this is all when the temple was standing, right? In the 3rd and 6th years of that cycle, rather than fund your own pilgrimage to Jerusalem, the second tithe is used as the poor man's tithe, right? You give it to the poor. This is similar to leaving the corners of the field, or that which the forgotten gleanings, etc. That's all set aside for the poor. Okay, so the poor man's tithe. Got it. Charity for the poor. Why would a rich man be entitled to the poor man's tithe at any time? Well, what if the rich man finds himself completely illiquid? Yeah, he's rich, but everything gets so entangled in litigation or whatever that he literally doesn't have what to eat. Is he then entitled to the poor man's tithe? And how does this work? Right, so let's explore this for a second. Right, as it is taught in a Baraisa, a wealthy person is not entitled to take a poor man's tithe. He is instead expected to sell his assets and purchase food with the proceeds. But in the case of an individual who owns houses, fields, and vineyards, but at the present time he cannot find buyers to whom he can sell them, how's he going to liquidate his assets if no one will buy it? Meanwhile, he's starving. But at the present time, he cannot find buyers to whom he can sell them. One may feed him with food from the poor man's tithe up until half the value of his assets. And the master discussed this and asked, what are the circumstances that led to him being unable to sell his land? If everyone's land depreciated in value, and his land also depreciated along with theirs, so let us provide him with even more than half the value of his assets, as, since everyone's land also depreciated, the market value of his property is low, and he is genuinely classified as a poor person who may take as much poor man's tithe as is given to him. So rather, it must be that everyone else's land appreciated in value, and with regard to his land, since people see that he goes in and goes out for money, i.e. he is in need of money, they reason that he will be forced to accept a lower offer for his property, and consequently his land depreciated in value, right? It's like the wolves are circling. The wolves are at the door. They see that this guy's in trouble. He's in financial straits. And people recognize that he's going to have to sell his assets at a fire sale. And so the actual value of his property diminishes in terms of what he can get for it right now, because everyone sees that he's in trouble. It's like there's a run on a bank or a run on a particular individual. Now we're on 7b. Right? So the Gemara asks, but if that is the case, we should not provide him with even a slight amount of poor man's tithe. Since his assets, based on their market value, have a high value, he is not to be classified as a poor person. Okay, people won't pay right now because he's in trouble, but the assets actually do have an underlying value. And the master, Rabbah, said concerning this situation, no, The law that he is provided with only up to half the value of his assets is necessary in a case where he cannot sell, not because there's a run, in other words, people say, okay, we're going to get cheap prices for his property, but rather he cannot sell his property due to seasonal fluctuations in price. And this is because in the days of the month of Nisan in the spring, which is the beginning of the harvest season, the market value of land appreciates. And in the days of the month of Tishrei, in the fall, a time when the harvest has already been reaped and it is too late to prepare the land for the coming year, the market value of land depreciates. Consequently, everyone generally waits until Nisan and they only sell at that time of year. But this person, since he is in need of money, sells his land in Tishrei according to the current lower market price. And accordingly, based on the current market prices, his assets have a low value, and there is justification in regarding him as a poor person. Yet, since if he waited until Nisan, as everyone else does, his land would have a high value, he cannot truly be classified as a poor person. Therefore, he is permitted to take only as much poor man's tithe as will cover his losses. And the Gemara explains why he is permitted to take only up to half the value of the land, since it is the nature of land to depreciate up to half its value, and it is not in the nature of land to depreciate more than that. He is entitled to take poor man's tithe that is worth up to half the value of his land, and the rest he can supplement by selling his land at its current lower price. Okay, why are we talking about a rich person who's in financial trouble taking a poor man's tithe up to half the value of his land? Why did Abaye bring this up? And here also, with regard to damages, if one considers a case where the injured party comes to collect his damages during Tishrei, his legal right is to collect payment from superior quality land. And this will be a relatively large amount of land owing to the current seasonal depreciation in its value. Now we start to see, right, the sages are going to follow Torah law and derive principles from Torah law about how to make whole somebody who was injured. But we're going to, first we assess his damages. What exactly is the loss that the injured party suffered? Was his cow gored and died? Well, how much was that cow worth? Okay, that's perhaps, let's say that that's going to be the value that the owner of the ox that gored the injured party's cow, that's what he has to pay. Okay, exactly how much was that cow worth? And now that he has to pay, we got to be really careful to be fair here. Are we just going to liquidate right now when his land might be having a dip in its value, but like 11 of the 12 months of the year, his land will be worth a lot more? And by the time the sale is completed, his land will have gone up. And the poor person, the guy whose cow was gored, is he going to have a windfall just because his cow was gored during a time of the year when the land was worth much less? And so he has to receive a whole bunch of land that a month later is going to be worth much more money than the cow that he lost? You see why the sages are being very careful to ensure that there's a fair outcome. And that's why there's many factors involved if we're going to be liquidating real estate as to how it's appraised, when it's liquidated, how it's paid, etc. Right? It's not so simple. But if the injured party says to the one liable for the damage, okay, so give me slightly more land of intermediate quality instead of the superior quality land, then the one liable for the damage can say to him, if you choose to take superior quality land, as is your legal right, okay, so take a large amount in accordance with the current market value. But if not, and you wish to take intermediate quality land, then take according to the future value in Nisan, after it will have appreciated, which will mean that you'll be entitled to a smaller amount of that intermediate quality land. And this can be used to resolve the contradiction. The phrase in the Torah, of the best of his field shall he pay, which indicates that payment is made only from superior quality land, defines the injured party's basic rights. And the term, he shall recompense, which indicates that payment must be made in any form if you have money or movable property available, this is referring to a case where the injured party forgoes his rights. In such a case, the value of the land or the item he agrees to receive is appraised based on its appreciated value at the season when it is generally sold. Now we're going to skip a few paragraphs. We're on 7b, and Rava said, whatever he gives the injured party as payment, he must give him of the best of that type. Right? So Rava says, look, are you going to give him intermediate? Are you going to give him land? You have to give him of your best land. Are you going to give him a grain? You have to give him of your best grain. Whatever kind of payment you choose to make the injured party whole, of the best of that kind of property that is in your possession, that's what you have to use to satisfy your liability to make the injured party whole. Whatever he gives the injured party as payment, he must give him of the best of that type. So for example, even if he pays in bran, he must pay with his best quality bran. And this is the meaning of the phrase, of the best of his field. So accordingly, the contradiction is resolved. The term he shall recompense indicates that payment can be given in any form, but the phrase of the best of his field indicates only that whichever form of payment is used, it must be of a superior quality. And this is not, as Abaye initially understood it, as limiting the form of payment specifically to land of superior quality. And indeed, that is the halacha. That is the law. That's how these cases are resolved. Now, the Gemara keeps pushing. The Gemara asks, but isn't the best of his field written? Which suggests that the requirement to pay with one's best land applies only when one pays with land. And so why are you saying that if he pays with bran, it has to be the best bran? Maybe if he pays with bran, any bran will do as long as it's worth the right amount. So rather, when Rav Papa and Rav Huna, the son of Rav Yehoshua, came from Rav's academy, they explained it as follows. With regard to payment, all items are classified as property of the best quality, as if an item cannot be sold here, it cannot be sold in another city. Since movable items are easily liquidated, they are always considered an acceptable form of payment. And this is with the exception of land, which is not always easily sold. Therefore, the law is that one who is liable for the damage must give the injured party from his best quality land, which is easier to sell. But if he's paying with cash or movable property, any cash or movable property will do. And this is in order to ensure the possibility that a buyer will jump at the opportunity to purchase it, thereby, in terms of that you have to, if you're going to pay with land, it has to be superior quality. This is to make sure that you can liquidate it, right? This is in order to ensure the possibility that a buyer will jump at the opportunity to purchase it, thereby providing the injured party with the possibility of liquidating it, right? What we're seeing here is that when you pay with superior quality land, you don't liquidate it and then give the cash to the injured party. You give him the superior quality land. And this resolves the contradiction. So the phrase of the best of his field indicates that if payment is to be made with land, it must be superior quality land. And the term he shall recompense indicates that if payment is to be made from movable property, anything worth money may be used. Rav Shmuel bar Abba from Akronia asked Rabbi Abba, when the court appraises land to determine if it is to be classified as being of superior quality, does it appraise land based on the quality of a property owner's other land, or does it appraise it based on the quality of land in the world at large, right? In other words, he has to pay with superior quality land. Does that mean he has to pay with land that anyone would consider superior quality? Or does it mean that he has to pay with the best of his own land? You know, maybe the only land that he owns is a garbage-strewn, empty lot, you know, in a bad neighborhood. That's not superior quality land in anyone's eyes. But if that's the only land he owns, that's the best of his land, you know, or let's say he owns 2 lots in this bad neighborhood full of garbage, very, low quality type of land. Okay, but one lot is a little cleaner than the other. It's going to be a little easier to attract a buyer. Okay, so that's the superior quality among the lots that he owns. So what are we saying? He has to pay with superior quality land. Does superior quality mean that anyone will consider superior, or just the best of his own land? So the Gemara notes do not raise the dilemma in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Yishmael, as he says that we appraise land based on the quality of land owned by the injured party. That didn't even enter our question before. And therefore, payment is made with land that is of a similar quality to the best quality land that the injured party happens to own. Accordingly, it is obvious that the classification is based only on the land of the injured party. Okay, but we don't follow Rabbi Yishmael. When you raise this dilemma, it is in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Akiva, who says that we appraise the land based on the quality of land owned by the one who is liable to pay the damages. And he pays with his superior quality land, even if its quality exceeds any of the land that the injured party happens to own. Right? The injured party doesn't necessarily own anything. Maybe he owns a cow that was gored by the ox, and he doesn't own any land. Why would we have been talking about his land? That was because Rabbi Yishmael said the way that the verse was worded in the Torah, he shall pay of his best quality. Maybe that refers to the injured party. But Rabbi Akiva says, we're talking about the guy who owes. We're talking about his land, and his land that is used to pay the damages has to be his superior quality land. Now we're back to our question. Does his superior quality land mean his best land or land that would be considered superior quality no matter who owned it? So the Gemara asks, what is the answer to our dilemma? When the merciful one states, the best of his field, does the stress in the verse on his field serve to exclude only the possibility of appraising land based solely on the value of the land of the injured party, but land is appraised based on the quality of land in the world at large? Or perhaps does it serve to exclude the possibility of appraising land based on the quality of the land of the world at large, and it is sufficient if the land he pays with is his best quality land? And Rabbi Abba said to him, the merciful one states, the best of his field. And you say the court appraises land based on the quality of land in the world at large? Certainly the term his field teaches that it is sufficient that the land be the best of the land of the one who is liable for the damage. And in fact, that's the law. If he has to pay with land, it will be the best of his own land, but we're not going to go somehow appraise the best land in the world and say that he has to match that. It's just whatever land he owns, it's going to be the best of that land that's going to be used to pay the damages. Now, we're going to skip a few more paragraphs where the Gemara explores a few nuances of how and when we appraise his land to determine which is his superior quality land and how much of it he's going to have to sell in order to satisfy the damages. It gets a little bit technical, so we just skip down a bit. We are on page 8a now, and Ravina said, another resolution to the contradiction between the Baraisas that were in this area that we're skipping about appraisal is that the Baraisas disagree with regard to the opinion of Ula. What does Ula say? By Torah law, a creditor collects from inferior quality land. So that's very different, right? An injured party collects from superior quality land. But if you borrow money from Tom and then later you can't pay Tom back, well, Tom, when he lent it to you, he received a lien on your property in case you don't pay back the loan. Which of your property can Tom take as your creditor when you don't pay back the loan? Your superior, your intermediate, or your inferior quality land? And the answer is, it seems like a creditor takes from the inferior quality land according to Ula, right? By Torah law, a creditor collects from inferior quality land. As it is stated, Deuteronomy 24:11, right? You lent money to someone, he's not paying you back. You shall stand outside, then the man you have a claim against will bring his collateral out to you. So one can infer, what item would a person typically choose to bring out for use as collateral, and which could potentially become the repayment of the loan? Certainly a person would choose the most inferior of his utensils. The verse thereby indicates that a creditor collects from inferior quality land. But if so, for what reason did the sages say that a creditor collects from intermediate quality? Right? The sages upgraded the creditor's rights. The Torah says he gets from your inferior quality land if you don't pay back the loan. The sages said the creditor collects from your intermediate quality property. Why did the sages upgrade the rights of the creditor? What do you think? So that people will lend money. Right? They instituted this ordinance so as not to lock the door in the face of potential borrowers, as if creditors were limited to collecting from inferior quality land only, they would be hesitant to offer loans in the first place. So this was a policy consideration to make sure that people with money will lend to people who need money. They upgraded the rights of the creditor. Skip a paragraph, and now the sages taught in the Tosefta, Ketubos 12:3, if one owes money to pay damages, to repay a loan, or to pay a woman's marriage contract, and he owns inferior, intermediate, and superior quality land, and he sells all of his land, then if he sold all of the land to one person or to three people simultaneously, all the buyers replace the land's prior owner with regard to payment of his debts, right? I lent money to Tom. I borrowed money from Tom. Tom lent me a lot of money. So he then received a lien on my property, right? That my property will serve as collateral in case I don't repay the loan. Now, I get into all kinds of financial trouble. That's why I'm not repaying the loan. I do own some real property, some land, but because I'm in such big trouble, I sell it, right? I sell the land. I didn't have a right to sell it because it was the collateral for the loan with Tom, but I did it anyway. I sold it anyway. So, and then what did I do, of course? The money that I received for the land that I sold, I'm a financial moron. I lost that also. So now what? I have no assets whatsoever. I used to own land that was Tom's collateral for his loan. I sold it to someone else, and I spent that money. The new owner of the land. Can Tom go to the new owner of the land and take that land, which was his collateral? Answer, yes. Yes, he can, because that property had a lien on it, right? Now, maybe I'm a shyster and I didn't disclose that to the purchaser, but the purchaser has an obligation whenever he buys a land to do his due diligence and make sure there's no liens, because it can happen that there was a lien and the creditor can come and take that land, and that's what's being described here. So if I sold all of my land in this example, whether I sold it to one person or I sold it to three different people, maybe I sold the superior quality land to one party, intermediate to another, and low quality land to a third party, can Tom come and collect? Yes, he can. If I sold it all to one person, he goes to that person. If I sold it to three people, presumably the intermediate quality land, maybe that's where the one he can go after. Let's see. So if the borrower sells all the land to one person or to three people simultaneously, then all the buyers replace the land's prior owner with regard to repayment of his debts, that the creditor who had a lien on that property can go to the new owners. Why? At the time when each debt was created, each creditor gained a lien on the plots of the debtor's land from which they have a right to collect. As a lien remains in effect even if the land is sold, then even after the sale, each creditor can collect from the plots of land upon which they have a lien. Accordingly, damages are collected from the superior quality land, the loan is repaid from the intermediate quality land, and the marriage contract is paid from the inferior quality land. Right, in the example given here, the guy who ended up selling mortgaged property with a lien on it, he had three different kinds of debt. He owed damages to a party that he injured, he owed a loan to somebody that he borrowed from, and he owes payment of a marriage contract to, let's say, the woman that he divorced. And those three types of obligations we've learned elsewhere. The injured party collects from superior quality, the creditor from intermediate quality, and a marriage contract is paid out from inferior quality land. Now, if he sold his plots of land one after the other, not he sold all three at the same time, but he sold one after the other, then all the creditors collect from the last buyer. Regardless of the quality of the land he purchased, if that buyer does not have sufficient land purchased from the debtor to pay all the debts, the creditors take the land that he has and collect the remaining sums from the one who purchased land before him. And if he also does not have sufficient land, they collect the rest from the one before him, i.e. the first buyer. So the sages instituted that creditors may not collect from land that a debtor sold, even though it is technically still lien to them, as long as the debtor still has sufficient means with which to repay the debt. You only go after the lien if the debtor, just has no assets with which to pay. If he has some kind of assets to pay, you take from that. Now, accordingly, after the sale of the first plot of land, the creditor's rights to collect are restricted to the land that remains in the possession of the debtor, and consequently, they gain a lien on it, irrespective of its quality. Therefore, even if that land is subsequently sold, their rights to collect are restricted to that land. And only if the value of that land is insufficient to cover the cost of the debt may they utilize the original liens they had on the plots of land that were sold first. Now, the Gemara clarifies, with regard to the first case in the Baraisa, where he sold all the land to one person, what are the circumstances? If we say that he simultaneously sold all of the land to one person, well, that is difficult. Now that the Baraisa teaches us that if he sold the land to three different people at the same time, where it is possible to say that the sale of one of them preceded the other sales, and yet you say the law is that all the buyers replaced the land's prior owner equally, and the possibility that one might have preceded the other is disregarded, is it necessary to teach the law is the same in a case where all the plots of land were simultaneously sold to one person? If this is listed explicitly in the Baraisa, it is obvious that the Baraisa is referring to a case where the plots of land were sold one after the other. So the Gemara asks, but what is different about the latter clause of the Baraisa, where the plots of land were sold to three buyers, one after the other? And it says that explicitly. And the creditors collect only from the last buyer. It is different in that each one of the first two buyers can say to any creditor who tries to seize the land they purchased, hey, do not collect my land, as I left a place for you. A plot of land was in the debtor's possession. I didn't buy all of his land. When I bought his land, I was well aware that he had other land. So in case someone had a lien on the land that I bought, they can go and collect from his remaining land, not from me. Therefore, wait a minute. I left a place for you, a plot of land in the debtor's possession from which to collect. In other words, when the first two buyers purchased their land, the plot of land remained with the debtor, and therefore the creditor's rights of collection are restricted to that land. Now the Gemara continues its question. Well, in this case as well, where all the plots of land were sold to a single buyer, with regard to each one of the first two plots of land that were sold, let the buyer say to any creditor who tries to collect, with my purchase of the first two plots of land, I left a place for you, a plot of land in the debtor's possession from which to collect. Therefore, even though the debtor subsequently sold the buyer all of the land, the creditor's rights of collection are restricted to the last plot of land that the debtor sold to the buyer, irrespective of its quality. Why then does the Baraisa rule that in this case each creditor collects from the land that was originally lien to him? So the Gemara explains, with what are we dealing here? This is a case where the individual buyer purchased the superior quality land last. Accordingly, the buyer is satisfied with allowing each creditor to collect from the land that was previously lien to him, rather than having them each collect from the superior quality land. And so says Rav Sheshes. It is a case where the individual buyer purchased the superior quality land last. So the Gemara asks, okay, if that is so, let them all come and collect from the superior quality land. Their rights to collect should be restricted to it, since it was purchased last. And the Gemara answers, because he can say the following threat to them. If you are silent and do not insist on collecting from the superior quality land, and take the land of quality that is due to you according to your standard legal rights, as in a case where you collect directly from the debtor, i.e. the injured party will collect from superior quality land, the creditor from the intermediate quality land, and the woman with a marriage contract will collect from the inferior quality land. Then take that land and I will allow you to do so. But if not, if you insist on taking the superior quality land that I purchased last, then I will return the bill of sale of the inferior quality land to its prior owner, i.e. the debtor, and you will all be forced to collect from the inferior quality land, because whenever the debtor has land in his possession, you are able to collect the debts only from him. So the Gemara asks, if so, this is the reason for the ruling in the Baraisa. Then if this is the reason for the ruling in the Baraisa, now we're on 8b, then also with regard to damages, let the buyer say this to the injured party. He could threaten to return the bill of sale of the inferior quality land to the debtor, which would force the injured party to collect directly from the debtor's inferior quality land. Since the buyer can do so, he can effectively force the injured party to collect from the purchased intermediate quality land instead of fulfilling his right to collect from superior quality land. And yet, the Baraisa teaches that in this case, each party collects from the land that was originally lien to him, which means that damages are collected from superior quality land, indicating that this threat would not be effective. So, what are we actually dealing with here? We are dealing with a case in which the debtor died and his inheritors are his orphans, who are not subject to an obligation to repay the debts of their father. When one dies, his monetary debts are not inherited by his children, and therefore the lien of the creditor rests solely upon the buyer of the land. Any lien that was in effect with regard to the land he owned at the time he incurred the obligation, it remains, and his creditors can therefore collect what they are owed from that land, even if it is in the possession of a buyer. Therefore, we cannot say that the ruling in the Baraisa is based on the fact that the buyer can threaten to return the bill of sale to the debtor, or in this case to his orphans. In this case, even if he were to return the bill of sale, the creditors would not be able to collect from the land now in the orphan's possession, as they received it anew, and not as an inheritance from their father. Therefore, the creditors can still collect from the plots of land that remain with the buyer. So the Gemara suggests another explanation of the Tosefta. Rather, not all the creditors collect from superior quality land, which was the last plot of land purchased from the debtor, because the buyer can say to them, what is the reason that the sages said one is not paid from liened property, i.e. property lien to a creditor that has been sold by the debtor, whenever there is unsold property still in the debtor's possession? It is due to an ordinance created solely for my benefit, as I should not be expected to pay from the land I purchased when the debtor is still able to pay. If that ordinance were to be in effect in this case, all of their liens would be in effect with regard to the superior quality land, as that was purchased last. In this case, I do not find this ordinance satisfactory to me, and I would prefer for the lien of each creditor to remain in effect with regard to the land that it had been on initially, and I will give each of you that land. And the Gemara notes this fact, that one is not required to avail himself of the financial benefit provided by a rabbinic ordinance, is in accordance with the opinion of Rava. As Rava says, anyone who says, I do not want to avail myself of the financial benefit provided by an ordinance of the sages, such as this one listens to him. Right? So you see, the sages created an ordinance in order to protect buyers of land, or in order to protect creditors. Right? So if you have some strange circumstances where that ordinance that protects a certain party actually ends up hurting him, so then he can say, oh, I don't want to make use of that ordinance which the sages decreed for my protection, because in these circumstances, it doesn't protect me, it hurts me. So I waive my rights, as it were, under that particular decree, so that I have a better outcome in this case. And it sounds like he can do that. The Gemara asks, what does Rava mean by saying an ordinance of the sages such as this one? And the Gemara answers his statement is in accordance with the opinion of Rav Huna. As Rav Huna says, the sages enacted that a husband must sustain his wife. right? When a man marries a woman, he has an obligation to provide for her, right? In the ancient world, even then, we saw that there were some women who work and have their own income. Rare as that must have been in the ancient world compared to the modern world, nevertheless, it sometimes happened, right? So he has an obligation to sustain her, but she can waive that right if, in fact, she has more income of her own. And why would she want to do that? Because since the husband is obligated to sustain his wife, any income that she earns goes to him. But if she actually makes a lot more money than him, she says, you know what? You don't have to sustain me, and I'll keep my own income. So that's a situation where she would waive her rights because those rights come along with other obligations that she doesn't want to be tied to. Right? The sages enacted that a husband must sustain his wife, and they also enacted that he receives her earnings in exchange. And yet, a wife is legally entitled to say to her husband, I will not be sustained by you, and in turn, I will not work, i.e., you will not keep my earnings. Since his obligation to sustain her is only for her benefit, she may forego her sustenance and retain her earnings for herself. Now, the Gemara discusses a limitation on the buyer's ability to refuse the benefit of the rabbinic ordinance. So now back to our case, it is obvious that if the buyer sold of the land he purchased from the debtor, the intermediate and inferior quality land to another buyer, and he retained in his possession only the superior quality land which he had purchased last, then all the creditors may come and collect from what's left in his possession, and that's the superior quality land. And this is because it is the last land that he purchased, and consequently was the last plot in the debtor's possession. You see, the point is that as the debtor was selling off his land, the liens of his creditors, get more and more focused on what remains of his property. So if he sold off his intermediate and inferior quality land, and all he has left is superior quality land, so all his creditors have a lien on that land. If he then sells that, so the liens travel with the superior quality land and not with the original parts of the land that those creditors might have been entitled to. And this is because it is the last land that he purchased and consequently was the last plot of land in the debtor's possession. So accordingly, by virtue of the rabbinic ordinance, the creditor's right of collection is restricted to that land. And the intermediate quality and inferior quality land are no longer in his possession. As if the intermediate quality and inferior quality land are in his possession, he is able to pay those who are owed money with that land. Like meaning the creditor and the woman collecting her marriage contract. Collect from the intermediate quality land and from the inferior quality land respectively, as it is not satisfactory to me, the final buyer who ended up with the superior quality land, to avail myself of the financial benefit provided by an ordinance of the sages. In this case, the ordinance also benefits the second buyer, since it provides that as long as the first buyer retains some of the lien land, the creditor's right of collection is only from that land. Since the second buyer also benefits from the ordinance, the first buyer cannot refuse the benefit of the rabbinic ordinance because doing so would be at the expense of the second buyer. The plot gets complicated. But if the first buyer sold only the superior quality land that he had purchased last, and he retained in his possession the intermediate quality and inferior quality land, then what is the law? Abaye thought to say, all the creditors should come and collect from the superior quality land, since that land was the last plot of land in the debtor's possession. The creditor's right of collection was restricted to that land, irrespective of the fact that it was then subsequently sold twice. I'm almost done. Questions or comments, please get them in. So Rava said to him, what has the first person sold to the second in any sale? Any rights that will come into his possession. And since, if the creditors were to come to the first buyer while he was still in possession of all three plots of land, he could have had them collect from the intermediate and inferior quality land. And this is the law, even though when he initially purchased the intermediate and inferior quality land, the superior quality land was still unsold property in the original debtor's possession. As, although there is the rabbinic ordinance that one does not exact payment from lien property when there is unsold property still in the debtor's possession, the buyer could have said to them, I do not find this ordinance satisfactory to me. So Rava continues, therefore, since the first buyer had the right to say this, the second buyer can also say to them, collect from the intermediate quality and inferior quality land in the first buyer's possession. As when the second buyer purchased the superior quality land, he purchased it with the understanding that he also acquired all the rights that the first buyer had with regard to that land. Accordingly, he also acquires the right to insist that creditors collect from the intermediate and inferior quality land. In a related ruling, Rava says, in the case of Reuven, right now we're trying to make examples that we can understand these principles a little better. I put some names on it. It's still a hypothetical, but let's try to get tachlis. What's an example? So in the case of Reuven, who sold all of his fields to Shimon simultaneously, right? I, Reuven, hereby sell you all of my fields. Shimon puts money on the table. Boom, all the fields were sold at the same time. And then Shimon proceeded to sell one of those fields to Levi. And now Reuven's creditor comes to collect the debt. So if the creditor so desires, he collects from Shimon. And if he so desires, he collects from Levi. And we said this only in a case where Levi purchased intermediate quality land from Shimon. A creditor's right to collect the debt from intermediate quality, when a creditor has a lien, it's on intermediate quality land, as we learned earlier. So if Levi purchased from Shimon intermediate quality land, right? So Shimon retained the superior and the inferior quality land that he purchased from the original owner, Reuven. Now Reuven has a creditor, right, who lent money to Reuven, and he had a right to collect from intermediate quality land. Well, all of the land that Reuven had was sold to Shimon. Then the intermediate quality land was sold to Levi. So now that Reuven's creditor comes along to collect the intermediate quality land that he had a lien on, who does he collect from? Sounds like he collects from Levi. Does he? A creditor's right is to collect the debt from intermediate quality land. Accordingly, in this case, Reuven's creditor can collect his loan from the intermediate quality land even after it has been transferred from Shimon to Levi. Nevertheless, if he so desires, he may insist on collecting his loan from any inferior quality land that was left in Shimon's possession. And this is because a creditor also has the right to demand payment from a borrower's inferior quality land instead of the intermediate quality land if he wants to, and therefore that land is also liened to the loan. But if Levi purchased superior quality land and inferior quality land from Shimon, right, and Shimon was left only with Reuven's original intermediate quality land, then no creditor can collect only from Shimon's intermediate quality land, as Levi could say to him, for this reason I was particular to purchase, but if Levi purchased the superior and inferior quality land from Shimon, then no. The creditor can only collect from Shimon's land, the intermediate quality land that Shimon was left with. Why? Because Levi could say to him, this is the reason I was particular to purchase only the superior and inferior quality land from Shimon, which is land that is not fit for you to collect from as a creditor. And a different situation, if Levi purchased the intermediate quality land from Shimon as well, so he bought all of it, right? Shimon bought everything from Reuven, and then Levi bought everything from Shimon. We said that Reuven's creditor can collect from Levi only in a case where he did not leave some similar intermediate quality land in Shimon's possession. As in that case, Levi is unable to say to the creditor, I left a place for you, because he took all of it from Shimon. He bought all of it from Shimon. But where Levi did leave some intermediate quality land in Shimon's possession, then the creditor does not collect from Levi because Levi is able to say, I left you some land to collect from, the intermediate land that I didn't purchase from Shimon. Take it from Shimon, not from me, says Levi. That's what we've got today. And with God's help, we'll be continuing with page 9, maybe 9 and 10, tomorrow on Tuesday at the regular time, 6 p.m. Pacific. Okay, let's take a couple of questions before Nina and I go to this Jewish Journal event And Google signed me out of the document Nina uses to communicate with me. And so it takes a moment extra for me to get in and get the questions. Come on, come on. Okay, 2 questions from Joe. How much time is allowed to pass between judgment and payment? I don't know offhand. I mean, there's going to have to be a rabbinic court, right, to pass the judgment. And it's not like that court necessarily meets every day. But even once you get in front of the court, you make your case. The case is proven. The judges rule in favor of the injured party. Do they transfer those assets that day, that week, that year? I don't know. It's a great question. I'm pretty sure we're going to get to that issue later in the tractate. And Joe also asks, at this time in history, can real estate be bought and sold only within one's own tribe? Okay, so that's so interesting. What you're alluding to is that in ancient Israel, first of all, you couldn't really sell land most of the time. When you sold a field, right, that was, a member of the tribe of Benjamin owns a field, and he sells it, what he's really selling is the number of years remaining until the next Yovel, right, the next Jubilee year, when all land purchases and sales are undone, and the land returns, right, to the original tribal holding. So because of that, because that's the way it was done, in many situations, you would prefer to sell land not to a member of some other tribe in their holding, but only to your tribe. So at this time in history, Israel is run, by a secular government, and land is bought and sold, similar to the way it's bought and sold around the rest of the world. And I don't think tribal considerations that come into it. Mostly because, unless you're a Levite, I happen to be a Levite, so I know that I'm of the tribe of Levi. And a Cohen is also of the tribe of Levi. Everyone else is a Yisrael, right? And they don't know whether they're descended from Judah or from Gad or Dan or Asher, Naphtali, Issachar, Zebulun, etc. We don't know. We don't know who people are descended from. And though we have geographic demarcations in Israel of what were kind of the ancient tribal holdings, that's just more like on a map. I don't think that really gets involved in real estate, in property law, when properties are bought and sold. There's certainly other issues in modern times about who you can buy and who you can sell land to and who you can buy property from that have political ramifications, shall we say. But it's not in terms of the ancient tribal laws. God willing, when Mashiach comes, and it will be clarified who is, we'll all know what tribes we're a member of. And then, maybe we'll all be restored to our original tribal holdings. And then you might ask, well, when Mashiach comes and there's resurrection of the dead and you have millions and millions of Jews coming back, right? Jewish history is over 3,000 years old. How are all these people going to be restored to their tribal heritage within the land of Israel? And the teaching is that when Mashiach comes, the land of Israel will grow. It will be miraculously expanded in a spiritual manner that is not comprehensible to us now before Mashiach comes. And everyone will have a place, and this won't be an issue at all. But there will be many other miraculous things going on at that time too. That may be the least of them. That's what I've got for us today. With God's help, we're together again tomorrow, 6 p.m. Pacific, the regular time, to continue our journey through Tractate Bava Kamma. Good night and Chodesh Tov.